Terminator franchise has had a funny trajectory. The first movie is often held in pretty common regard as being a sci-fi classic with arguably the best sequel ever made. Such high praise of course comes with the inherent problems of being almost impossible to further the franchise in a way that can be considered anything but a bit of a letdown. Though Terminator 3 did have its moments. What fans pondered for years, however, was what the exploration of the future that we saw glimpses of in the original movies would be like as the setting for the central narrative, and whilst we did eventually get that in film form, for better or for worse, computer games, as far as I can tell, have exclusively taken place in the future. The latest outing into the post-apocalyptic comes from Teon Studios, who I'll be honest I wasn't too familiar with, but screenshots and trailers alluded to them having captured the feel of those 10 minutes or so that we saw in the original movies in the form of a first-person shooter. When the game begins, we are given a very brief summary as to the events that have led us to this point, but it's Terminator, right? So all you need to know is that Judgment Day has happened, and now the world is in a barren hellscape filled with walking robots. We're introduced to our main protagonist, Jacob Rivers, as he narrowly escapes an encounter with a T-800, throwing us into the standard jump over this and crouch under that hurdles to let us know that the game has officially started. With a radio in one hand, you will quickly get the feel for the atmosphere whilst you are funneled past a few organic feeling set pieces, with a fellow Resistance member chiming in across the airwaves to help you get your bearings and evade danger.
Turn left, up there, through that building.
It will only take a few minutes to get a glimpse of some of the enemies that we will be up against, acquire your first few weapons in form of a pistol and a pipe, which I'll be honest I had forgotten about until I was scrubbing through my footage, and some ultra vision goggles which will help you see in the dark and more importantly allow you to see Terminators through walls. These opening moments do a pretty decent job at introducing you to all the mechanics of the game without them feeling like they've been put there to arbitrarily just show you, in a pace that is appropriately slow and tense. You'll have some minor encounters with spider robots who will give you the old zap zap, pick up some scraps and materials, and before long run into your first story characters in form of Patrick and Jennifer. The dialogue in the game allows us on occasion to choose which response we want to give to the situation, and this will usually result in either being appreciated or met with scorn. We buddy up with the two fellow stragglers and ferry them down the way to reunite them with some other fellow humans, where we have the optional task of leaving Pasadena or searching for further survivors.
I'll search for other survivors.
Good, I'll get the bus ready. Before you go, talk to Erin. She might be able to get you a med kit. Oh, and take this.
Doing so will get us some additional firepower and set us on our way. Whichever option you choose, you will eventually hightail it out of Pasadena to what is effectively a hub world, and from here on the game kind of moves at your own pace. Terminator Resistance is broken into missions represented by chapters, and I'm not sure it tells you what chapter you are on outside of the load game menu, which you might not click as selecting continue game is a far more familiar route. Missions consist of main quests and side quests represented by yellow and blue on your map. Side quests, as the name implies, are completely optional, though you will only ever get one or two of these at a time, so it would seem like unnecessary rushing to not do them. The stages in which these quests play out are shrunken down open world style environments to explore, and I always favour these over big sprawling open worlds. The problem with fully open worlds is that you have to fill it with things and it can be very hard to get right, where the small sandbox approach allows the player to choose their own path to a location and to what degree of exploring they want to do along the way, without allowing them to stray too far away from enemies, set pieces, and locations that are the focus of the map. Making your way through each stage, you'll find enemies to shoot and items to pick up, and that's pretty much what you'll do for 90% of the time. That might sound like a criticism, but it's a first-person shooter, that's what the game is, and enjoyment will derive from how fun the combat is to engage with and how interesting the levels are to traverse. So let's start with the gunplay. Your starting weapons of pistol and Uzi will soon be superseded by an assault rifle and the staple of any FPS, the shotgun. Combat right off the bat is generally good fun. Weapons have pleasing sound effects, enemies who are taking fire will sprout flames and electric as they help deplete, ending in a satisfying explosion once they are dispatched, and ammo is sparse enough that you will have to be considerate with what weapons you use on each enemy. The starting enemies range from small to big spiders, flying drones and turrets. Engaging with these enemies is somewhat optional, as to go alongside the shooty fun, the player can also opt in for the stealth approach, with line of sight visibility being displayed by a bar at the top of the screen, which when full will lock that enemy onto you until you are out of sight for long enough. Ammo in the game can be looted from enemies or found in the environment. Luckily for our resistance fighter, there are an outlandish amount of drop boxes scattered throughout the wasteland, keeping us in fresh supply. Weapons along with ammo can be found in the wild, though these can also be bought from vendors in the hub world, where you can also sell unwanted items and weapons. Currency in the game is derived from general loot labelled trade resource, which is littered everywhere throughout the environment, giving you a necessity to explore every nook and cranny. You will also stumble across a large number of materials which can be used for crafting, should you find an appropriate bench. Crafting allows you to create consumable items, ammunition and bombs, the most useful of which in the early game being the ability to create medkits. That's right, we have a health bar, no sitting behind a wall breathing heavily waiting for it to magically slide back up to 100%. Like everything in this game, it has a very old school feel, and one that I always welcome. Items in the game are mostly lying around for you to freely grab, though the more valuable ones will the majority of the time be locked behind a door or in a locked box, which can be lockpicked or hacked via 2 mini-games. The lockpicking will look familiar to anyone who's played an Elder Scrolls game, as it's the same, though I'd say here it's a bit more forgiving, but still not fun in the slightest. Hacking, however, lets you play a little cyberpunk game of Frogger as you move a tiny block across pathways, avoiding the corresponding blocks as they move with or against you. This one is more enjoyable and can not only be used to open boxes and doors, but allows you to hack turrets to fight on your side. There is a lack of emergency with this though, as bringing out your Atari portfolio pauses all the action around you, meaning you can take as long as you need. Not all locks can be opened or craftables be created from the get-go though, as these skills make up 2 of the 9 short progression trees that can be leveled up. Doing most anything in the game will acquire you experience points, whether that be killing an enemy, hacking a turret, or completing a mission. Enough experience points gains you a level jump and 1 skill point to spend. Each skill unlocks with only 1 point, but some are locked off until you've reached a certain level. There are also manuals that can be found that give you an instant skill point, though I only ever found 1 or 2 of these. Those make up all of your basic gameplay mechanics that will see you through the 10-hour campaign to Terminator Resistance, and that is plenty for an old school shooter. The formula of bigger, better guns plus more exciting enemies and environments tends to work pretty consistently for the genre, though to drive the player to want to see around the next corner, the pacing needs to be consistent, which is where Terminator Resistance kind of runs into a few problems. The game has a great opening, which is quickly followed by a stealth section where you have to evade an army of T-800s. These cannot be killed with standard weapons, so in the early game, have to be ran away from, and there are some really effective moments showing you just how many Terminators there are compared to how helpless you are. We know from the movies that the real sense of dread that comes with a Terminator is that it's virtually invincible, it won't start coming after you, and all you can do is leg it and hope for the best. But this is a first-person shooter, and we need to fight some Terminators, damn it. So before long we are introduced to plasma weapons that are effective against the machines. Fighting the Terminators is a real mixed bag, and I think it's partially down to the concept of actually being able to fight a Terminator. You can't make it too weak, or it will make a mockery of what we know about them. If you make them too hard, the game will be unplayable, or have to limit the encounters to 1 Terminator every once in a while. But we know this future is littered with them, so their difficulty falls somewhere in the middle, in that they can kill you really quickly, which they should be able to, they're Terminators, but they are also pretty weak if you are scoring headshot criticals. What lets these encounters down though is ironically the AI. If a Terminator sees you, it doesn't take more than a few seconds of being out of sight to stop pursuing you, and on several occasions I just closed the door and walked away. This disengagement happens just a little too quickly for encounters to be tense, and alerting one enemy will not draw aggro or alert any other enemies around it. You can shoot one in the head whilst it stares at another, and only one will turn round. For a race of killing machines predicated on godlike artificial intelligence, the omission of even Bluetooth between the robots to communicate is a bit of a letdown. To counter that criticism, if you do want a harder experience, when you do see more than 1 Terminator, shoot them both and don't run away, you won't last too long. From here on, your starting weapons fall into the realm of redundancy, as whilst they are still effective against the flying drones and smaller spider bots, they're just not as effective as the energy weapons, and T-800s will almost always drop ammo to keep you from running out. It isn't just the trademark skeletons that we have to stand off against, however, as we do have tanks, and these enormous guys to fight. I actually quite like the presence of these. A few times I stumbled across one minding its own business, patrolling around in the wasteland, and it helped to make the environment feel like there was more going on than what I was just engaging with. With new enemies comes new weapons, and I'll be honest, I didn't realise for quite a while that the weapon that I was using wasn't the one that I could have been picking up. They all look pretty much the same, and they're all called something very similar, which is usually 2 letters preceding a hyphenated number, but I'll just chalk that up to me not paying proper attention. Energy weapons once acquired can also be fitted with microchips to boost their stats. 3 of these can be inserted into each energy weapon, with the caveat that the connectors at each side of the chip have to match to complete the circuit, so you can't simply bang 3 lots of damage boost in there, unless you have chips that align that way. This gives a nice level of customization to your weapons, which really helped with the fire rate of the sniper rifle. As you progress and your arsenal grows, so will the story. I won't touch too much upon it, as there are some nice twists around the end that I didn't see coming, so I won't spoil. But as a member of the Resistance, your primary objective, as you might expect, is to take down Skynet through various means. Interacting with NPCs in the connecting hub world will obtain side missions for the following level, and branching paths the conversations take cause you to take different paths in the plot. With a premise like Terminator, the granular plot isn't necessarily needed at all, but what is here is small yet thoughtful enough that it left me more than satisfied than I expected in the end. As the plot does progress, we will be sent to different locations. The majority of these will be at night time, but occasionally there will be one that takes place during daylight. These were always really welcome to give the game some much needed variety. Speaking of variety, not every mission takes place in a small sandbox. To break up your exploratory time, you'll be forced into fast-paced linear shooting galleries, which will team you up with resistance fighters and push you through waves of enemies. These sections were always really fun and were a welcome shift in pace, the final act especially being one of the most standout moments. Unfortunately though, there is a slump in the middle of the game where there are one too many missions set in the same nighttime wasteland environment, fighting the same enemies, and not introducing anything new other than experience points and leveling. Where the game really succeeds though, is in capturing the feel of the Terminator franchise. When it's at its best, it nails the look, the music, and there are some quite tense set pieces, but other times the game loses momentum a little too quickly, and dull moments can be spaced a little too far from something exciting that it made me end my session a little bit sooner than I thought I would. Where Terminator Resistance also succeeds is with its consistency. This isn't a AAA title, and everything is to a standard that might not rival some titles, but there is no aspect of it that ever dips below it either. Shooting things is fun, the game looks great, it's always clear what my objective is, and I didn't spot any glitches or bugs. There are some quality of life improvements that could really help the game though. For one, the crafting menu is toss. It tells me what materials are required for each build, but doesn't show me what materials I have, so I end up blindly crafting what I think is most important. Another personal gripe of mine is that the vendor in the Resistance base isn't marked on the map. So for about 4 missions, I ran straight by not thinking to check, and missing out on a few weapons that I could have had at the time. There is also a weird photography mechanic which I'm not sure has any purpose outside of 1 or 2 missions. It might give you some XP, but I feel like there were bigger plans for this that never came to pass. The character animations are also a bit uncanny valley. Dogs especially have something about them that is very eerie. I think it's because they modelled them with human eyes. Oh, and then there's the completely jarring sex scene, which was unexpected and went on for way longer than needed. Twice. But with all that said, I did really enjoy Terminator Resistance. It's very competently made, at times pretty fun, and at its worst, it can be dull. What it is a really good start. I know it's not Taeon's first game, but it gives me really high hopes for the upcoming RoboCop game. The campaign took me almost 10 hours to get through, with doing every side quest. I think that's a perfect length for an old school shooter, and to keep you playing a little bit longer, there is Infiltrator mode. This is a short, generated level where you play as a Terminator hunting down a key target, gathering intel and scanning humans. I found this to be a lot of fun. Shooting humans as a Terminator after spending 10 hours putting countless laser shots into robots made me feel like a badass. The Terminator vision also has some cool effects with the way it replicates the body section scan from Terminator 2. There is also some DLC available, but I haven't decided to jump into that yet. So that's Terminator Resistance. It's at the high end of average. It doesn't try to overachieve, but achieves everything it tries to do. The AI can be a bit naff at times, but it's not the worst I've seen. But if you are a fan of the Terminator franchise, there's enough moments and music beats to cover your cost of entry.